I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast. We are going live with Liz Oyer. Liz Oyer, the lawyer. Liz, welcome.
Thanks, Joanna.
For those who don't recognize Liz from her Instagram or YouTube following, or have missed her podcast on the Daily Beast, Liz was the pardons attorney under Joe Biden. And it's hard to find anyone who is paying more attention to what is going on with Donald Trump and his very free rein with pardons. So, Liz, I wanted to talk to you first. We've got specific pardons that have already been made that we want to go into with you. But I wanted to talk to you about the likelihood of him pardoning the most famous sex trafficker in America, Ghislaine Maxwell, who, as we know, was interviewed by the number 2 in the Justice Department, Todd Blanche, a former personal lawyer of Donald Trump's, and then very quickly, after she'd spent 2 days speaking with him, moved from her Tallahassee jail to a prison camp in Texas, a state where she has a relative, her sister, and where we learn from emails and various conversations with inmates that are now coming out that she's getting preferential treatment. So this all looks as though she has information that Donald Trump probably thinks is worth keeping under wraps, and she's been given preferential treatment in the prison system, but a lot of people are now saying basically they've done a deal, she'll get a pardon. That now seems like it might be a bit more tricky for him, given the release of so many Epstein emails yesterday. What are you hearing, and what are your thoughts?
Joanna, this situation with Ghislaine Maxwell has all the makings of a quid pro quo. It certainly seems like she has been angling for a commutation of her sentence. So that's not necessarily a full pardon, but a reduction of her prison sentence. And one of the ways she's been doing that is by trying to curry favor with the Trump administration. It's really extraordinary that the number 2 official in the Justice Department went to this prison and spent 2 days meeting with her to essentially pump her for information. That official, Todd Blanche, also previously served as Donald Trump's personal attorney. And it sure looks like he was sent to that prison as Trump's fixer, much more so than as the number 2 official in our Justice Department. One of the reasons that I say that is that the Deputy Attorney General doesn't typically get their hands dirty in this way, going to meet with a witness. And they certainly don't do that in a case involving a person who is convicted of sex crimes against minor children. Blanche went to that prison to meet with Maxwell, it seems, to allow her to spin a story that essentially exonerated Donald Trump. And we now know that because we've seen some of these emails that were released yesterday. There were emails between Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein that are inconsistent with what she told Todd Blanche. But shockingly, strikingly, Blanche did not confront her with any of those emails during their interview. Undoubtedly, he had access to all of those documents because the Justice Department has a huge trove of Epstein-related materials. And had he been seeking the truth of the matter, he would have gone there to speak with her with those documents in hand and shown them to her and confronted her inconsistencies, but he didn't do any of that. We now know that she has been getting special treatment at this prison, including access to all of the materials that she needs to put together a petition to the president to reduce her sentence. And we know that as of yesterday, Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, is not ruling out the possibility of a commutation of Maxwell's sentence. She said that Trump has not yet considered it, which is shocking in and of itself. Any other president in history would have categorically ruled out even the possibility of commuting the sentence of someone who is convicted of sexually abusing children, but not Donald Trump.
So, Liz, if Donald Trump were to either commute her sentence or give her a full pardon, what would the victims be able to do? I mean, I am still flabbergasted at the scale of the operation that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein operated. I don't know if you've read it, but Nobody's Girl, the Virginia Giuffre memoir that came out recently, goes into incredible detail about how Ghislaine trolled schools, she trolled playgrounds, she trolled spas for girls to come and service Jeffrey Epstein. There's all sorts of details about them sending cars with, nice chauffeur-driven cars to pick up girls as they left their schools, and they would come over and give Jeffrey his infamous massages. What can the victims do either to preempt this, or once, let's assume the pardon may happen, what can they do afterwards to draw attention to this?
One of the things that the Justice Department is responsible for doing in every case is consulting with the victims about the possibility of any relief that could be granted to the perpetrator of a crime, including clemency. So, when I was the pardon attorney, in any case in which there was a possibility of clemency, it was our job to ensure that the victims were engaged in that process and had the opportunity to give their perspective, to weigh in for or against that grant of clemency. It does not appear that that has happened here. It doesn't appear that Todd Blanche has spent any time with the victims of Epstein's crimes and Maxwell's crimes, and it doesn't appear that the White House cares at all about the perspective of the victims. In fact, the way Caroline Leavitt and Donald Trump talk about this, it re-traumatizes the victims every time they refuse to rule out the possibility of clemency. So it's really shocking, and frankly, just it's wrong that the victims have not had any say in the possibility of clemency and in the discussions around clemency. But it doesn't appear that that's a priority for this administration. If a commutation were to be granted, the victims would have the possibility of pursuing civil remedies through the courts, but there's really nothing that they could do that would wipe out that act of presidential mercy should Donald Trump choose to commute her sentence. They'd have no opportunity to object after the fact, or to try to undo that commutation, or to really seek any relief in that process.
Wow, it's extraordinary. Lots of people are joining us. And for those who've just joined us, no, Ghislaine Maxwell has not been pardoned. But there's all sorts of people saying that they think a deal has been done and that they're just waiting for the right time. Certainly, we know she's been moved after her conversations, as Liz mentioned, with Todd Blanche from her jail in Tallahassee to Texas, where she appears to be getting preferential treatment, as Liz just mentioned. And Liz, for those of you who've just joined us, was the former pardons attorney under the Biden presidency. So she really, nobody has been watching what Trump has been doing with pardons and the pardon economy more closely than Liz. So certainly Ghislaine Maxwell has been getting preferential treatment in jail, all of which seems very odd. Now, Liz, you mentioned that what we're seeing in some of the files that were released yesterday are inconsistencies with the way that Todd Blanche talked to Ghislaine Maxwell. And you said he would have had access to all these emails because they reside in the Justice Department. So what else have they got access to, and what else do you think we may get to see over the next few weeks?
Well, the Justice Department has access to a huge trove of materials that have not yet been released. The Attorney General promised very early in her tenure that she was going to release all of these materials, and she referenced truckloads of information. And at the end of the day, she has released very little of it, and it does not appear that Todd Blanche took any documents with him when he went to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, which is really just evidence of the fact that he was not trying to get at the truth. The emails that have been released that show that Blanche allowed Maxwell to lie to him and did not make any effort to check those lies or push back on those lies really suggests at this point that Todd Blanche is working on behalf of Donald Trump, the man, not on behalf of the American people, and that he is complicit in this cover-up, essentially. So it's really just shocking the way this reflects on the top officials of the Justice Department. It also appears that after that meeting, Blanche played a role in orchestrating this transfer of Maxwell to the lower security prison that you mentioned. One of the things that's so striking about that is the Bureau of Prisons has a detailed, lengthy manual that outlines who can get placed in which type of prison facility, a prison camp being the lowest security type of facility. And it is very, very clear that a person convicted of a sex crime involving child victims, like Ghislaine Maxwell, is not eligible to be housed at a minimum security camp. The only person that can override that regulation is either someone at the very top of the pyramid of the Bureau of Prisons, meaning the director, who was appointed by Donald Trump, or the director's boss, who is Todd Blanche. So that decision would have to happen at the highest levels of the Justice Department. And it appears that it was Todd Blanche's call, most likely, to transfer Ghislaine Maxwell to this minimum security prison, notwithstanding the fact that Bureau of Prisons regulations specifically prohibit it. I was a public defender, a federal public defender for 10 years before I joined the Justice Department. And I can tell you that I never saw, not once, a case in which a sex offender like Ghislaine Maxwell was housed at a prison camp. This appears to be part of a brokering of a quid pro quo between Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell's attorneys on behalf of Donald Trump.
Yeah, very interesting. So can I ask you something with your public defender's hat on? How unusual is it for a woman to be imprisoned for, or how unusual is it for a woman to be sentenced to 20 years for trafficking children? And when they get sent, and in her case it was girls, when they get sent to a woman's prison, is there an effort to protect female prisoners alongside her?
It's not as common for women to be convicted of this type of crime as men, but it's not uncommon either. There are, unfortunately, a large number of women who do get involved with sex trafficking as perpetrators. And often it's because of the things that you're describing, the ability to cultivate these relationships with the victims. So Ghislaine Maxwell is not a singular case in that respect, but it is less common for women to commit those types of crimes. Once incarcerated, there's really little to kind of differentiate those people convicted of those types of crimes from the rest of the population at the prison, which is one of the reasons why those who are convicted of that sort of crime are held by default at a higher security facility. The minimum security facilities, the camps, don't have any secure perimeter, so you could in theory just walk out of that prison facility and into the community. And a decision has been made to protect communities from sex offenders by placing them only in prison facilities that have secure perimeters that prevent them from entering the community and victimizing other people. But that's not what's happening in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell.
It's absolutely crazy. So let's talk about a sex offender that Trump has already pardoned. Andrew, I think we pronounce it Taki. Can you tell us about his case?
Yes.
There are various commentators, I should say, saying, oh, this is clickbait, blah, blah, blah. It's actually not clickbait. Now we're coming on to a sex offender who has been pardoned by Donald Trump. And it's a really disturbing story.
It is a disturbing story. So this is actually part of a larger phenomenon. Donald Trump, on his first day in office, pardoned about 1,500 people who were involved with the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. And he did not require any individual vetting of those people. So everyone was pardoned regardless of their past criminal history and regardless of what type of character they display. That's not how the clemency process is supposed to work. Typically, clemency applicants under other presidents throughout history have been vetted carefully before the president decides that they're worthy of a pardon. But Donald Trump didn't do that here. And Andrew Tate is one of at least a dozen people pardoned by Donald Trump who has gone back out and committed new crimes. In his case, his crime was attempting to solicit a minor for sex online. And he was convicted of that crime and sentenced essentially to time served because of the fact that he had gotten this pardon pardon from Donald Trump for his involvement in the Capitol riots. He is not alone in that status. There are others who have committed very serious crimes who've either been convicted or are awaiting trial on new charges, and they include others who have been convicted of sex offenses involving minor children. They include a man who was convicted of plotting to kill numerous law enforcement agents. They include an individual who called in a hoax bomb threat to the home of former President Barack Obama. They include several individuals who have been convicted of fatal DUI crashes causing the deaths of other people. So these January 6th pardon recipients, many of them are people who have displayed really tremendously poor character since they received the pardons, which is probably consistent with the conduct they displayed on the day of those crimes that they were pardoned for, and have ended up back in jail because of a lack of vetting in the clemency process.
It's just extraordinary. And also, it doesn't make anybody any safer if part of the DOJ's job is to make sure that law-abiding citizens are protected. It's hard to understand how this is even with the strangest kind of political strategist hat on. It's just hard to imagine how this can possibly make sense for anybody.
It certainly doesn't make us safer. Donald Trump's pardons across the board have made us less safe. He has pardoned people who have committed serious crimes, who have not demonstrated rehabilitation or remorse for those crimes, and have not demonstrated that they have earned the opportunity for a second chance through clemency. But there's something else going on. So for Donald Trump, it's not about justice. It's not about public safety or the public welfare. He has really created sort of a quid pro quo system in the clemency context where he is using the pardon power either to reward people for political loyalty or to reward people for financial contributions to causes that are important to him. You don't get a pardon under Donald Trump based on merit. You get it because you have demonstrated that you can do something for Donald Trump that he values.
Well, and you have talked, last time you came on, we talked about white collar crime, and we talked about the pardon economy and how you need to make it clear that you're willing to hire one of Donald Trump's friends,
Right.
To get close to him, to make it clear that you're prepared to contribute to the library or whatever else. Let's just talk about CZ, the Binance founder, because that may be one of the most egregious pardons when it comes to corruption and how it impacts the Trump family finances. Can you talk to us about that case?
Sure. CZ is the nickname for this man, Changpeng Zhao, who is a cryptocurrency billionaire. He's actually one of the 25 wealthiest people on earth. He's worth somewhere upward of $80 billion. He went to prison because he used his cryptocurrency platform essentially to, he allowed his cryptocurrency platform to be used to funnel money to terrorist organizations, criminal organizations, all sorts of really bad actors. And he was prosecuted for that. The US government concluded that he was endangering US national security by creating a platform for money to be sent to organizations like Al Qaeda, Hamas. We're talking about really bad international actors. He went to prison not that long ago and was also ordered to pay a very large fine for his conduct. And when he learned that Donald Trump had been elected, he started a campaign to get a pardon from Donald Trump. He has talked about how he started reading about pardons and how you can get a pardon. And he really positioned himself early to try to get a pardon from Donald Trump. And one of the things that he did that's really just staggering is he was able to use his tremendous wealth and business connections to broker a huge investment in Donald Trump's family cryptocurrency business. He was able to broker an investment of $2 billion, that's billion with a B, into the Trump family cryptocurrency business. And that has been tremendously profitable for lots of people whose last name is Trump. So for Donald Trump's sons, for Trump himself, and also for the Witkoff family, who are close friends of the Trumps and business partners in this cryptocurrency company. The Trump family family has made hundreds of millions of dollars reportedly just this year on this cryptocurrency business, and CZ was able to prop it up for them. And as a result of that, he got a presidential pardon.
It's just incredible. And I think his fine was $4 billion, right? And the laundering that they'd been doing was, as as you mentioned, on behalf of Al Qaeda, ISIS, Iran. It just beggars belief that he would be pardoned. And someone pointing out here his role in bringing down FTX. So we had the job lot of the 77 pardons, with those who'd been involved in trying to say that the 2020 election was fake. Can we also talk about just sort of low-level scammers? I mean, you talked about Katie Cothran in a post on Instagram, which actually was what prompted me to make me think we must have you back on, because there are high-profile pardons, people like CZ, and then there are just low-level cheats that are also being pardoned. Can you talk about Katie's case? Because that was a very interesting one to me. There was not very much money at it, but it was just such a depressing story of a low-level guy.
Yeah, that's right. So this guy, Cade Cothran, was the chief of staff to the former House Speaker for the state of Tennessee, a Republican named Glenn Casada. And he was a rising political star in Tennessee at the age of 32. He got this high-level position working for the House Speaker, and that did not last very long because a whole slew of his text messages were publicly released in which he was engaging in stunningly inappropriate behavior of all manner. There were messages in which he was soliciting sex from interns who worked for him, from young women in his office, sending them inappropriate sexual messages in which he was speaking to others about pursuing these interns sexually. There were racist text messages in which he said things that I will not repeat, using language that I certainly would not repeat. And there were also messages in there about his drug use, including using cocaine at the workplace. I mean, really just every type of conduct under the sun that made him unfit for a position of public trust, like the one he held in the Tennessee state legislature. So he was forced to resign. And after he resigned from that position, he and his boss, the former Speaker of the House for the state of Tennessee, Glenn Casada, created a sham business using their political connections to essentially funnel taxpayer money to themselves. He was convicted of offenses involving fraud and public corruption alongside his boss, and he was supposed to report to prison. Both of them were later this month. He was supposed to serve 2.5 years in prison, and his boss 3 years. And before they reported to prison, Donald Trump wiped out their convictions with a full pardon, meaning that they don't have to spend a day in jail and they don't have to pay back any of the fines that were associated with their convictions. These are people who, have not demonstrated remorse, rehabilitation, have not demonstrated good character, but nevertheless, they got full pardons from Donald Trump, which really just has a delegitimizing effect on the pardon power as a whole. Cawthorn claims that he was the victim of a weaponized justice system under President Biden, but actually that claim is nonsense because his criminal investigation began during Trump's first presidency and continued into Trump's second presidency, with Trump's U.S. Attorney's Office seeking this prison sentence in his case. So he wasn't a victim of anything other than his own depravity and vanity and corruption. But nevertheless, he's the person who Donald Trump rewarded with a full pardon.
And again, hard to understand from a political point of view how this is helpful to Donald Trump, because this is taxpayers' money that was stolen. And also it's other Americans, prosecutors, spending all the time to research these cases and investigate these cases. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes incredible attention to detail. It takes a
Yeah.
proper court case. It takes a jury time to find these people guilty. I mean, you know, when people get called for jury service, they always roll their eyes. How can I get out of it? How can I get out of it? And then, of course, you get called, and actually it becomes, people end up taking it incredibly seriously, and it's one of those things that really requires you to pay attention and be a full citizen. How demoralizing, Liz, is this to the lawyers and the police that bring the cases, and also the juries who sit through these cases and make the decision that these people are guilty?
Very demoralizing, Joanna. You're making a really important point there. This undercuts our justice system. It undercuts the way our justice system has historically worked and is supposed to work. And it is demoralizing to the people inside the system, as well as the people outside who it's supposed to protect. People in the public who are supposed to be protected from people like Cade Cawthorn, protected from people like Andrew Taki. It's rewarding those people instead of protecting society from them, which is what the justice system is supposed to do. Donald Trump has actually shown a real penchant for pardoning corrupt politicians. Cawthorn and his boss are just two of the people he's pardoned in the political sphere. There's actually about 20 or so elected officials between Trump's two terms that have received clemency from this president. Most of them are people who have used public office for personal gain, who have corrupted their public office, who have betrayed their obligations to citizens, and who have enriched themselves on the backs of the people that they are supposed to serve. Donald Trump seems to see something of himself in those people, and he's granted pardons liberally to those types of individuals. But those are individuals who don't meet any of the criteria for pardons that are laid out by the Justice Department. There's actually a lengthy document called the Justice Manual, which is essentially the Bible for Justice Department employees, that has a detailed set of guidelines for when it is appropriate to recommend a presidential pardon. And, Cade Cawthorn meets zero of those. Andrew Take meets zero of those criteria. I cannot point to a single person that Trump has pardoned who really meets the criteria that are in place for granting of a presidential pardon.
Well, and I'm assuming also that there are, I think last time you came on the podcast, you said there were, I may be wrong, but I think you said around 14,000 cases that actually probably did deserve to receive pardons. But of course, they are receiving none of the presidential attention that they deserve.
Yeah, one thing that is being lost in the conversation about Trump's pardons because they're so corrupt is the fact that there actually is a legitimate and good purpose for the clemency power. It was put in the Constitution by the founders of our country because they believed that there are cases when the justice system can produce results that are too harsh. And there should be a place in the justice system for mercy for those who deserve it, for those who have earned it. And there are regular Americans who are serving prison sentences around the country under mandatory minimum sentencing laws, people who are serving decades upon decades for nonviolent drug offenses, who actually have demonstrated rehabilitation and remorse and readiness to return to the community. Those are the types of people that the clemency power was intended to work for, but those people are all being overlooked and ignored by Donald Trump in favor of those who have political connections or who are writing him large checks. There are, at last count, there were about 15,000 applications from ordinary Americans backlogged with the Justice Department, and that number hasn't been updated in quite some time because of the government shutdown. But I've been told that it may be closer to 20,000 applications that are just waiting while Donald Trump, lets folks with political connections or donations jump the line and get relief that they really just do not deserve.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And another thing that I know you've talked about, which I hadn't considered, but is again very much a theme in this, and I think absolutely infuriating for victims who've been scammed, is that many of these people don't need to pay restitution to the victims. And we had, last time we were talking, you mentioned someone who'd been running an electric truck company who had gone through, I think, $600 million of investment, and was not required to pay any of it back. And again, pardoned by Trump, and yet he was scamming investors.
Yep, that's exactly right. In total, Donald Trump has used the pardon power to forgive well over $1 billion in financial penalties that were imposed on the folks who have received clemency. And that includes restitution that was owed to victims of crime, as well as money that's owed to US taxpayers. The pardons and the commutations he's issued have had the effect of just wiping the financial slate clean so that these folks don't have to repay any of the money. We saw that with the commutation of George Santos. He was released from prison, and his financial obligations to pay back the money that he stole from others were wiped out. That's how Donald Trump does it. And he's done it to the tune of well over $1 billion in just 10 or so months that he's been in office.
Are there any other high profile criminals you think he might be thinking of releasing? I mean, P. Diddy jumps to mind. We've discussed Ghislaine Maxwell. Do you hear of any others?
Well, it seems like everyone under the sun who has a federal criminal conviction is angling for a pardon in this administration, because suddenly it seems possible for anyone who can afford it to get a pardon. And we're seeing Donald Trump amassing a tremendous amount of power just by dangling the possibility of a pardon. In the case of Diddy, for example, he has not ruled it out. He's said a number of times that he could do it, he may do it. And so now we know that Diddy has a legal team that is falling all over themselves to try to access the levers of pardons. And that means paying people in Donald Trump's orbit to lobby on behalf of the pardons or for legal services. It means trying to position themselves in a way to be able to do any favors that could benefit this president in trying to get a pardon. And Donald Trump is really amassing power and wealth just by making known that pardons are available to those who ingratiate themselves with Donald Trump, the man. I don't know which specific pardons may be coming down the pipeline, but honestly, every time I see a news alert pop up that another pardon has been granted, my stomach drops. They just seem to be getting worse and worse in terms of the level of corruption and the level of depravity and the level of damage that they are doing to our justice system and to our rule of law society.
Well, it's also extraordinary to think that he might think this plays well with voters. I mean, if I had a young child, I'm a parent, my kids are older now, but if I had a young child and, you know, someone like Andrew Tuckey shows up on my block, I would be absolutely livid that he, a sex offender, had been let out of jail free. I mean, it's remarkable. Now, I want to come on to your own legal case, because I know you're suing the Justice Department in two different cases. But before we do, we've got lots of comments just actually asking us about Michael Wolff, my colleague on the Inside Trump's Head podcast, because he had some emails that were released yesterday in the Epstein cache. And actually, I just wanted to refer people to the podcast we put up yesterday on YouTube. I had lots of questions for Michael too, so I grilled him as hard as I could about how he used his connections with Epstein to find out as much as he did. Anyway, I'm just referring people to that. It's I think 50-minute podcast where Michael and I talk in depth about his methodology. But Liz, tell us where we are with your own cases with the DOJ.
My cases have been pending since shortly after I was fired in March, and they have really gone nowhere thus far. I am challenging my firing because it was plainly illegal under the federal civil service protections. I was, as pardon attorney, a non-political, non-partisan employee. They call them career employees of the Justice Department. And the intent was that I would stay on and serve under Donald Trump. And I attempted to do that for about 7 weeks into the new administration before before I was very abruptly fired, and my firing violated all sorts of protections that apply to civil servants. The Justice Department is arguing that they don't have to abide by any of those laws that protect career nonpartisan employees. They are arguing that the president can do whatever he wants with the federal workforce because of his status as the chief executive officer in our country. That is a very scary and alarming position for them to be taking, because it's essentially saying the president is free to politicize the workforce, even as far as functions go that relate to protecting our public safety, that should not be partisan. They believe that Donald Trump should be able to fill all of the jobs in government with political appointees, with people who are loyal to him, not loyal to the Constitution or the rule of law, but loyal to Donald Trump, the man. And that's the position they're taking in my case. They have really been trying to stonewall the release of information in connection with my case. Notably, there are documents that I'm seeking that will corroborate exactly the explanation that I gave for my firing, which is that I was fired shortly after I refused to make a recommendation that a friend of the president, the actor Mel Gibson, get his gun rights back after he was convicted of a domestic violence crime. I was unable to make that recommendation because it was not in the interest of public safety, and I was fired hours later. And there's all sorts of documentation that will lay that out, but the Justice Department is refusing to give it to me in the legal proceedings, even though it is required.
It's just incredible. How? I know that a lot of career lawyers are leaving the Justice Department.
Mhm.
We know that the top 3 people in the Justice Department are all former personal lawyers of Donald Trump. We mentioned Todd Blanche, the number 2. The number 1, of course, is Pam Bondi, who's a former lawyer for Donald Trump, and then Emile Beauvais, the number 3. If eventually Trump leaves office and a different administration takes over, presumably they will bring in their own people too. But how difficult is it to rebuild a Justice Department when it's being hollowed out like this or politicized like this?
Yeah, every president gets to appoint some top officials at the Justice Department, and they turn over at the end of an administration. But that's actually a very small fraction of the Justice Department's workforce. Most of the employees of the Justice Department are not political appointees. They're career experts who are expected to stay on regardless of who's in the White House and use their knowledge and expertise to serve the American people. Fundamentally, most of the employees of the Justice Department, they're public servants. They're not political operatives. But during this administration, those public servants, those career officials have been targeted. They have been fired, and rooted out is a phrase that the Attorney General has actually used about identifying those career experts and forcing them out of the department. They don't want experienced people to stand in the way of implementing the president's political agenda, even when it is dangerous and not in the interests of the American people. As a consequence of that, we've seen reportedly over 5,000 DOJ employees leave the department in just the last 10 months.
5,000?
5,000 attorneys, just
5,000.
among the attorney staff of the
Wow.
department. And those include top experts in key areas like national security, for example, which is an area that should not be partisan. We want our national security protected, but top national security experts have been forced out, fired, or forced to resign. People who have really important, deep knowledge and expertise that is critical to protecting the safety of the American people. And we don't know now what's going to happen if we have a major crisis in our country. Are we prepared to meet it? It's a very scary time because the Justice Department expertise has been totally decimated, and I fear that we may not really see the full effects of that until we have a major national crisis on our hands that we learn that we are not equipped to deal with.
Oh, it's just so frightening, Liz. Okay, final question, and we would love you to come back regularly and keep us abreast of all these insane pardons that are going
Absolutely.
on. Good, thank you. And also, we want to stay on top of what's happening with your own personal case at the DOJ, because also it portends for so many other people there too.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about the appointment of Lindsay Halligan and this retribution theme that Trump has always talked about, has been very clear. I mean, he's told people, I will be your retribution. But we have a podcast dropping tonight with the ABC Washington correspondent John Carl, where he talks about the interesting thing that, yes, Trump is taking retribution against Democrats, but also against Republicans. So you have James Comey now indicted, you have John Bolton indicted, and of course, career prosecutors refusing to take on those cases. And so Lindsay Halligan, a former beauty queen, with no court experience, suddenly popping up in Virginia to take on these cases. Do you think that they will they stand these cases?
Well, it's an interesting question because there's problems on multiple levels that her appointment has caused. She's not qualified to be the U.S. attorney. She has no relevant experience. She is not a real prosecutor. She was installed for the sole purpose of achieving an outcome that the career prosecutors in this office were unwilling to touch. She was installed to bring a case against political enemies of the president that really was not based in fact or law. So she has that one purpose. There are a lot of questions that have been raised about whether she was legally installed in that role, and it appears that she was not. The administration appears to have bypassed the rules and laws that apply to appointing U.S. attorneys to get her into that office quickly. So one thing that we could see happen, and there is a hearing on this today in court, is she could be disqualified as the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, which could have the result of getting the prosecution of James Comey as well as the prosecution of Letitia James thrown out. One thing that's unusual is that she, the U.S. attorney herself, presented evidence to a grand jury to get those indictments, and her name is the only one that appears on the indictment. So if her appointment is determined by a court to be legally invalid, those indictments could be thrown out, and that could be very consequential, especially in the case of James Comey, because the statute of limitations to seek charges against him has now expired. There are a couple of cases around the country involving other U.S. attorneys appointed under similar circumstances to Lindsay Halligan, in which courts have already ruled that the appointments were illegal. So that does suggest that Lindsay Halligan may be found to be an illegally appointed U.S. attorney as well, which could have big consequences for these cases. There are also other arguments that are being raised by the defense lawyers that do appear to have some merit, including that these prosecutions were politically motivated in a way that violates laws around due process protections. That is another avenue that the courts could potentially rely on to dismiss these charges against some of Trump's political enemies. At the end of the day, just being subjected to a federal criminal prosecution is hugely disruptive. That in and of itself is a major punishment to any person. So to be wrongly targeted for political reasons is very unfair, but it is my hope that our justice system will not allow these politically motivated prosecutions to result in unfair and unjust convictions of the people who are being targeted by the president.
Yeah, and apparently even Pam Bondi was shocked by the appointment of Lindsay Halligan and her determination to go after Tish James and James Comey. Well, it'll be very interesting to see what comes. Are we expecting a decision today? I know the case is sort of being heard, but will we expect a decision today on whether or not Lindsay Halligan is qualified?
In theory, the judge could rule from the bench and make an oral decision today at the hearing. Probably the judge will take some time to consider and deliberate and to issue an opinion in writing sometime after the hearing. But this is an issue in which there's so much public interest that I imagine that the court will try to render a decision quickly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've got a couple of comments pointing out that Lindsay Halligan does have great hair, which she does. I mean, lots of the people around Donald Trump have great hair, and he, of course, has his own distinctive hair. But I remember Michael Wolff saying that Donald Trump had once said, you know, I may not have the best lawyers, but I have the hottest lawyers. So I don't know how far that gets you. Liz, Huge thanks for your time today. Incredible interest in what's going on here. You can see it from the energy of the comments. And please keep us posted, because it couldn't be more relevant and more scary. And as you say, America is not a safer place. And if I had spent a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks on a jury and then found that someone was just overturning the 12 people's decision that we had spent time arguing and thinking about, I would be furious. So it's very hard to understand who this serves other than Donald Trump's sort of, how can one uncontrolled impulses. Maybe
Yep.
he gets a kick out of it, but it's a very weird kick and it makes no one else safer.
Well, I really enjoyed the discussion, Joanna. Thank you for taking the time to highlight this important issue. I don't think that presidential pardons are really all that well understood by the public, but it is an area where a lot of damage is being done to our democracy. So I think it's important that people are paying attention. And I really appreciate you elevating this issue. I'm happy to come back anytime. I'm also keeping track on my Instagram as well as my YouTube channel of some of these pardons. So you can find me at Lawyer Oyer, and please have me back anytime to talk more about these pardons.
We will. And, you know, if only we didn't think there were more pardons coming, but I fear there are. Liz, thank you very much for your time and good luck with your own case.
Thank you,
And
Joanna.
thank you, everybody who's been sending in your thoughts. I'm still getting used to trying to read comments and listen to what our interviewee is saying. So bear with me. We're going to do more Instagram lives because we know that people really enjoy it. Thank you to our Beast members. Of course, be Beast to anybody who's following this. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to Liz's channels on YouTube, Lawyer Oyer on Instagram. And, well, let's just stay tuned to the rest of the news, because as Trey Parker, and I think this is the third time I've said it, but I'm so struck by it, Trey Parker, one of the creators of South Park, said, it's not that South Park has become political, it's that politics has become pop culture. And that may be one thing that Donald Trump has done for us, but at least there is a very high level of energy now in what's going on, even if there's some despair too. Liz, thank you very much. That's my
Thank you,
homily.
Joanna.
That's my homily for the day, and we will see everyone.